buffer overflows. What's up, everybody? So today we are looking at a very interesting subject, buffer overflows, a very common form of vulnerability majorly found in programs written in C and C++. The severity of the vulnerability is very high, and it could be exploited in gravely consequential ways, right from causing denial of service to execution of arbitrary code on the vulnerable computer. We are talking taking full control of the vulnerable computer. So without wasting time, let's get it. So think of a buffer as some space allocated to store some data before that data is used by the computer. And the reason why this form of vulnerabilities are very common in C and C++ is that C and C++ lack what we would call inherent bounds checking functions. And basically what that is C and C++ won't check the data it's handling against the allocated buffer space. And that means that if the data supplied is larger than the allocated space, then it will fill that space and overflow to the adjacent buffers. So this is what I mean. Assuming you have a C or C++ program that prompts the user for two details, right? It prompts the user for age and name, right? Some space has to be created to store these details. So let's assume the first space, the space for name has been allocated 15 bytes. The space for age has been allocated 5 bytes. You see, if a user supplies a name that is larger than 15 bytes, if a user supplies a name that is, let's say 18 bytes, then it means that name is going to fill this space and overflow to the adjacent space by how many bytes? By 3 bytes. And this is going to cause a problem because this space is meant to hold age. And basically that is what a buffer overflow is. There is an allocated space, but a user supplies data that is larger than that space, and that space therefore flows to the adjacent space, which is, essentially meant to hold some other important data. So that is it. So there are various forms of buffer overflows. Today I want to focus on stack buffer overflows, the ones that take place in the stack. For those of you who don't know, the stack is a data structure that holds data in a very particular way, in a last in, first out kind of order. So what that means is whatever comes in last comes out first, like in a pile of chapatis. The last chapati to be added to the pile ideally should be the first one to be removed. Or when you're packing your suitcase, the last cloth that you put into that suitcase ideally should be the first one to come out when you're unpacking, right? So that is the way the stack holds data. And one of the very important functions of the stack is to ensure smooth execution of functions inside of a program. That is one of the very basic and important functions of the stack. So whenever you run a program, whenever you click on a program in your computer, your operating system organizes the memory in a very particular manner. The operating system creates some space in the memory and it organizes that space in a very particular manner. So this is what I mean. When after you've clicked that program, your operating system is going to create some space in memory, right? And this space is organized in a very particular manner. And let's assume this side of that space is towards the lower memory addresses and this is towards the higher memory addresses. You don't have to understand this for right now. I'm just trying to explain where the stack is coming from. So the very first subsection in this space that the operating system is going to create is a subsection called the .text section. And this .text section will hold all the instructions of your program, the program that you want to run. All its instructions, are going to be held in that .text subsection. The next subsection is going to be the .data subsection, and this is going to hold all the initialized data of the program, the initialized data, followed by the .bss section that is going to hold uninitialized data, and then the heap is going to be initialized, and the stack is also going to be created, right? And basically towards the higher memory addresses of this space, you know, things like other essential things that are necessary for the smooth execution of the function of the program. So things like environmental variables are going to be held downwards. But we're not really concerned about, you know, these environmental variables and environment variables and, you know, the heap, the BSS data and text. We're not really concerned about this. We are concerned about this section, the stack, because this is where our buffer overflows are going to exist, the stack. This is what we are concerned with primarily. So as I mentioned earlier on, one of the very important functions of the stack is to ensure smooth execution of functions. So let's assume you have a C or C++ program, right? Those of you who do programming will tell you that execution of any program in C and C++ will begin at main, the main function. That is where execution begins. And when execution begins at the main function, it means that all the instructions are executed in the main function until, you know, the program execution meets an instruction leading it to another function. You know, if it finds an instruction leading it to another function, it will stop the execution of the instructions in main and go to execute the instructions in that function. So take an example of this program. The very first thing this program is going to do is to print subscribe on the screen, after which the execution of the instructions in main is going to be paused and the flow of execution is going to be directed to the addition function, where these two numbers are going to be added and the result stored in the variable called result. After the execution of all the instructions in addition are completed, then the program execution is going to return in main and print out CraftyShellcode, after which the program is going to exit. So this is a very simple program that has two functions. It has an addition function and it has a main function. And the addition function simply takes two parameters of two numbers, creates a variable called result and stores the addition of those two numbers in result. It has the main function which just prints out subscribe, invokes the addition function, and then prints out CraftyShellcode and then returns 0. A very simple program, but one that is going to be very helpful in trying to help us understand how the stack is laid out. Having that program in mind, let us now see how the stack is going to be organized. So assuming this is our stack, and this is towards the lower memory addresses, and this is towards the higher memory addresses. The stack grows towards lower memory addresses. So the very first thing that is going to happen, the very first thing that happens in the stack is the parameters of the function in question are pushed onto the stack in a reverse order. So it means the last parameter is pushed in first, right? So we have the second number, and then the first number, and then after the parameters have been pushed onto the stack, the function is called, and that places the return address onto the stack. The return address is an address that the computer is going to look at after it has finished executing that function. It will look at the return address and see, oh, where am I supposed to go next, right? In this the flow of execution, what is the next instruction for me to execute? So that next instruction to be executed is what will be pointed to by the return address. So in our code, the return address will point to this, because it is after the execution of addition is complete. Where does the computer go? It will return to main, and this will be the instruction that will be put. So return will point to this instruction. So after the return address has been placed onto the stack, we have what is called the EBP. The value of the EBP register is pushed onto the stack, and then the value of the ESP is copied into the EBP. The ESP is the stack pointer and just points to the top of the stack. And basically this procedure of pushing the EBP onto the stack and copying the ESP into the EBP. It's called the prologue, and it just helps the function to execute better. It might be a little bit complex right now, but you don't really need to understand it that much. I'm just trying to prove something here. So after the EBP has been pushed and the ESP has been copied into the EBP, then space is created for the local variables of the function in question, right? So in our program, we only had one variable, which is result. And now for our function, this is the way the stack is laid out. This is the way the stack has been laid out up to that point, right? Result, EBP, return, num, num2, right? And basically, the space that is carrying result, it's a certain amount of bytes long, right? And in this example, result is actually a result of an addition. But think of this variable as something that, if this was a variable that was user supplied, so something like you have a program that asks the user to enter or input his name or age, and this data was user supplied, if a user supplies data that is larger than this space in the stack, then the excess of that data is going to overflow towards the higher memory addresses going this way, right? And if your data is large enough, it will fill and overwrite the values of the EBP. It will overwrite the values of the return address. And you can already see how big of a problem this can be, because the computer will not know where to go next if this return address is invalid. So if this was the result, if this data was something like name, and we supply a name that is larger than this place and it overflows, and our name is so long that it even overwrites the return address, then after the execution of the addition function is complete, the program is going to crash, because the computer will not make sense of this garbage address that is in the return address. But what if we wanted to have more fun? What if we wanted to do something more than just causing the program to crash? Something meaningful, something like taking control over this computer. Well, in that case, if we supply accurate and deliberate memory addresses, if we supply here with some data, and then when it reaches the return address, we fill this space with an accurate and deliberate memory address that is very valid, but that points to an instruction that we ourselves want the computer to execute, then this is where the fun begins. Because if I overwrite all these addresses and put an address here, put an address in the return address, an address that points to an instruction to shut down the computer will shut down. An instruction to snap a picture with a webcam, it will snap that picture. An instruction to whatever we want, it will happen. And that is basically because we are overwriting the return address. And after the function has been completed, then when the computer goes to find the return address, so that it can continue its execution, it will find our own address and execute our own instructions. And this can be very, very, very dangerous, because you will basically own the computer. Any instruction you want, you just simply put the address of that instruction into the return address, and the computer will execute it. Of course, depending on the privileges that the program is running in. If the program is running as administrator, then you basically own the computer. So this is just simply how it goes. And yeah, this is how buffer overflows are made possible. So if you are a programmer in C and C++, it falls on your shoulders to ensure bounds checking, right? You have to ensure, if you allocate 15 bytes of space to store some data, you have to ensure that what the user supplies is not larger than 15 bytes, because if it is larger than 15 bytes, then we sort of fall back to this vulnerability and your program is vulnerable. So programmers will have to be very careful when you're programming your C or C++ programs. You have to ensure that the data that the user is supplying fits within the allocated buffer space that you select, right? You have to ensure that. Otherwise, this vulnerability will still be in your program, and it's a very dangerous vulnerability, as I have explained. So thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the episode, thumbs up will be amazing. If you rock with this kind of content, consider subscribing for more, and see you guys in the next episode where we continue our exploitation of buffer overflows. Thank you.